Continuing our investigation into the gateless barrier, case 9. Xingyang's non-attained Buddha. A monk asked Master Rong of Xingyang, the Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom, sat in the meditation hall for 10 kalpas, but the Buddha Dharma did not manifest in him. He could not attain awakening. Why was this? The Master said, "Your question has hit the mark. It is just so." The monk said, "I have realized he sat in the meditation hall. Now how do I realize he could not attain awakening?" The Master said, "As for me, I do not attain awakening just like him." Wumenguan says, "I admit what the old barbarians realized, but I do not admit that they discriminate that they have realized it. If an ordinary person realizes that they are an ordinary person, they are a sage. If a sage should be aware of themselves as a sage, they are an ordinary person." Wumenguan's verse says, "Much better than realizing the body is to realize the mind and rest. If one can realize the mind, there is no anxiety about the body. If both body and mind are clear and distinct, is it necessary for the wizard to be further appointed a feudal lord?" So we are here at the end of day 3, and I'm sure everybody's feeling a little bit tired. Everything's a little bit stiff. This is just the way that a third day is supposed to go. And yet here we are with the birds still singing, still sitting in the zendo, practicing together. We have these moments of clarity and dissolution and joy and gratitude. We have moments of frustration and disappointment and anger. This is just the way of sesshin. Part of our practice is just to rest in a way, or to settle into the experience of just engaging with this practice and allowing what happens to happen. The commitment that we make is just to stay put. The more we practice, the more we become familiar with the undulating experience that, maybe I feel wonderful in this moment, but I know to appreciate it, to enjoy it, but to not hang on to it or attach to it, because it just moves, and in the next moment, or in 15 minutes, or in 2 hours, it won't be the same. Maybe I'll be in a completely different circumstance. I'll be angry and upset, wanting to leave. And when those kinds of emotions come up, they certainly do. Even for me, sometimes I think, I wonder if anyone would notice if I just left for a little while. But I've done enough practice now at this point that I know, just wait, we'll see. Maybe after dinner or after breakfast, or after a little bit of a rest, or maybe after a walk, or maybe just in a few breaths, space will open up and things will seem different. So far, in my practice, this has always been the case. I remember when I first started practicing and I heard about Buddhism and I heard about enlightenment, I thought that sounded like a pretty great thing. I think that a lot of people come to Zen practice in a way to obtain something that they don't feel that they have. Somehow we're dissatisfied or unhappy, unfulfilled in our lives in one way or the other, relationships. We feel unloved or unworthy. And most of us, I think, have trolled around somewhat, looking for things to fill our holes, to fill the gaps that we find ourselves feeling from time to time. We can do that with food, and we can do that with money, and we can do that with objects, possessions. We can do that with education, or we can do that with accolades. We can do it with all kinds of things. And actually, my favorite kind of person to practice with is somebody who's actually been really successful in a lot of areas. Someone who's made a lot of money, and somebody who's got lots of degrees, or someone who's built companies up and sold them, had lots of successes. Because those people don't just sort of philosophically or conceptually understand that fulfillment isn't found in these things. Satisfaction isn't found in these things. They know it. When somebody has pursued a thing to the end with the hope and the aspiration of completion, satisfaction, fulfillment, and has actually accomplished, this is a really potent, powerful position. Because when we find that still this satisfaction escapes us, there is a renunciation that can take place, a real renunciation. Sometimes we've had people in our community who have pursued several successes and achieved them, and still have found themselves feeling dissatisfied, not complete. Sometimes stepping into practice from this position is a way of stepping back. This is a real renunciation. It's not so difficult to renounce things when you don't have anything. In some ways, practice, when somebody takes up a practice, when they're unsuccessful, when they're incomplete, there are no degrees, there's no money, there's no success of any kind. It's really easy to say, oh, I'm going to become a monk. But in truth, this isn't a renunciate way. In fact, sometimes it's just a way of hiding out, avoiding what's really scaring us, what's challenging, what's confronting us. It's a misguided way to practice. In some ways, renouncing the sort of worldly in this way to pursue spiritual practice is what Chogyam Trungpa pointed to as spiritual materialism. We make enlightenment or awakening into an object, the master object in a lot of ways. It's very difficult to assess enlightenment. It's very difficult to grasp this sort of fluid thing called enlightenment. But certainly we can hold it up above education, and we can hold it up above money or objects or relationships. We can say, oh, I'm pursuing enlightenment. And we do so in a way that sort of elevates us even beyond, the people who are so materialistic, pursuing money and jobs and things. Look at me. I'm pursuing enlightenment. And when we make awakening, realization into an object like this that stands outside of ourselves, we make this fundamental mistake. And we show our hand, so to speak. We show that we don't really understand at all. And that's what's happening in this case. A monk asked Master Rang of Xingyang, the Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom, sat in the meditation hall for 10 kalpas. But the Buddha Dharma did not manifest in him. He could not attain awakening. This is a story from an old sutra about this Buddha. In Japanese, it's Daitsu Chisho Buddha. Supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom. That's what the Daitsu Chisho means. It's a big name. The monk is asking, approaching the master, just as we were talking about yesterday, approaching the master to ask this question. And the teacher is sitting in a state of balance and listening to this question, listening to what the question is. In many ways, I find that when I look at this koan, the question I feel very much like this Master Rang when I read this case, because it's so straightforward. The Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sat in the meditation hall for 10 kalpas. 10 kalpas, and I've talked about a kalpa before. Yeah, that's a immeasurably long period of time. It's like an eon. One kalpa is like an eon. So he sat there for 10 kalpas. And Linji, Master Linji, makes some comments in the Rinzai record about this sentence or this comment. And he says that he practiced one of the 10 paramitas for each of the kalpas. So we have this Buddha sitting, the original text says on the Bodhi mandala, on the Bodhi seat, for 10 kalpas. So sitting in Zazen for 10 eons, practicing one of the perfections each for an entire eon. I think certainly some of us feel like we've been sitting here listening to me talk for 10 kalpas. And yet, with all of this zazen, the Buddha Dharma does not manifest in him. He could not attain awakening. Why not? As we sit here, engaged in practice, are we reaching for something called awakening? Are we seeking that critical missing element that we just lack in this moment, that we need to be complete and fulfilled? When the monk says this to the master says, "Your question has hit the mark. It's just so." Or I guess to make it shorter, he could just say, "Exactly. The Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sat in the meditation hall for 10 kalpas, but the Buddha Dharma did not manifest in him. He could not attain awakening." Exactly. Just so. The statement grasps this matter completely, and the master sees it, and maybe he thinks for a moment like, "Oh, great, this is a good student that really gets it." But when he responds in this way, "just so," the monk continues. Oh, the master probably thinks, "Darn, I thought he got it." The monk said, "I have realized he sat in the meditation hall. Now how do I realize he could not attain awakening?" Each of us, as we go through our practice, we always are being busied up. We've always got something to do. Whether that's the next thing that's on our agenda of items in the retreat, the next thing on our list, and our next responsibility, or whether that's what's coming down the road after this week or after this practice period. But even in the smallest, most subtle recesses of our mind, we're always very busy with something to do. How could we do that a little better? What is it that we need to accomplish? What is it that we need to acquire? What can I do to improve that? What can I do to be rid of that? We're constantly engaged in this busyness. As we sit in practice, the sort of background noise of our thinking mind begins to diminish. But always, we can hear, we can be aware of this busyness. Always something to do, something to improve, something to change, something to get. It's not always expressed or felt or understood as a as a complete thought, complete idea. But we always have this sort of subtle sense of something needing to be done. And this experience, this feeling, is one way of understanding it, or one word that we could use is dissatisfaction. Essentially, things are as they are. As we sit here, maybe just for a moment this week, just for a moment over the course of a day, there will be these moments of suspension in which nothing needs to be done. We can completely hear the sound of the birds. We can completely feel the sensation of the air on our skin. We can smell the incense and flowers. And yet, just for a glimmering moment, there's nothing missing. There's nothing that needs to be done. It's like a very refined balance point. Linji used to refer to this as buji, having nothing to do. And in many ways, this experience is realization itself. It is awakening itself. That sensation of needing something or having something to do or having somewhere to go or wanting to improve something, that fundamental dissatisfaction, the Buddhist term for it is dukkha. And it's important that we become familiar with it through our practice, because that feeling of dukkha, according to the Buddha, this is the very origin of suffering. And in those moments where, just as we are doing what it is that we're doing, where we are able just for a second or two, there is this experience of completeness, wholeness. So, in that moment, what is it that we've suddenly attained? And is there anything in that moment that we have attained? Is there anything in that moment that wasn't there the moment before? And is there anything in that moment of realization that after the noise begins, after we begin to think about all the things that we need to do, what we want to improve, what we want to change, has something suddenly evaporated or disappeared, had become absent? What this koan is pointing at is that already, just as we are awake. This is the first pronouncement of the Buddha upon his great awakening. It was just fundamentally we are all already awake, but we don't realize it. This fundamental realization in Zen Buddhism is that the moment we spring up, the moment that we're born into this life, the moment that we take a form, any form, whether we're talking about a tree, whether we're talking about a stone or a bird or a human being, that form arises complete. It is whole. Just as we are complete. Nothing lacking. Nothing missing. Nothing needing to be fixed or improved or changed. We begin to look around, comparing ourselves. But just like two trees springing up beside one another, these two trees are completely different, living in different kinds of soil, coming from different kinds of seed and having different amounts of sun and water and air. So it seems very strange for one tree to be assessing itself, how it should be growing and how many branches it should have and how tall it should be, how deep its roots should be, by looking at the other tree. Yet this is, as human beings, this is what we do, this is all we do. Looking around at this and that, worrying about how we're doing this, what we've got of that, what we, how we have accomplished in comparison to so and so. But the one thing that we never do is turn our light around and reflect what's there. We don't take the time to investigate our own roots, our own branches, our own environment. Because if we did, it would be very clear and apparent. Just as we are complete. The Buddha of supremely penetrating, surpassing wisdom sat in the meditation hall for 10 kalpas, but the Buddha Dharma did not manifest in him. He could not attain awakening. So, as the Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sits in the meditation hall, from where does the Buddha Dharma come that would manifest in him? Is it outside of him and it will come in to him and manifest? Where does the awakening that he cannot attain come from? What does he need to do to catch it? How can he go about having awakening? Wumen says, I admit what the old barbarian realized, but I do not admit that the old barbarians realize, but I do not admit that they discriminate, that they have realized it. I think many people, certainly myself included when I first came to practice, expected some kind of a pop or something like that, like colorful flashing lights or something. Whoop, 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 you're enlightened now. And I've certainly practiced with people who gave the distinct impression that they absolutely hated this whole endeavor and were only practicing to the point where that flash went off and then they could go put their feet up somewhere and drink a beer as a enlightened person with their... There's a Jim Carrey movie somewhere where they give them a medal of enlightenment at the monastery. Congratulations, you're a Buddha, you're awakened. Off you go. I think it's a joke, but I think that we sometimes kind of expect that or aspire for that or want that. Dogen says something like, don't expect to perceive your own awakening. We have all kinds of ideas about what awakening is. And what will be like when we have it. When we have awakening, when we're awakened. And the things, all the wonderful things that we'll do when we're an awakened person. Whenever I have conversations with people like this, it's always really clear that they're still grasping, reaching for the object of awakening. The most genuine experiences of awakening realization that I've seen or experienced myself are almost always accompanied not by, like, ha ha, I've realized it, but rather by like, oh, all this time, this was just staring me in the face, and I missed it. All this time I've been chasing after this thing, and it's been staring me in the face, and I missed it. So the person is not becoming bigger as a result of their awakening, their realization. They actually are becoming more and more ordinary, more and more immersed and clear about who they really are, underneath all the busyness, before all the things to do, coming to know our own roots, coming to know the earth that we rise out of. This is what Wumen is talking about when he says, I admit that the old barbarians realized, but I do not admit that they discriminate, that they have realized it. As we practice more and more, the idea of a finish line disappears more and more. I think for a long time in practice, there's always this sort of idea of a place we're going to get to where things are going to be, mostly done. I realize that there's always going to be practice to do, but But at some point, most of this mess is going to be largely cleaned up, and I'll be able to just take it a little bit more easy. But my experience has been quite the opposite. And as I continue to practice, I just see that the task, there's no bottom. There's no ending this realization. Not making something to do out of it. Not busying myself up with it. Just proceeding into practice. Deeper and deeper. If an ordinary person realizes that they are an ordinary person, they are a sage. These kinds of realizations, these kinds of awakenings, Buddhahood, it doesn't endow you with magical powers over all the other common un-Buddha people. This kind of realization helps us to see that realization itself isn't ours. It's not even a thing. It's not something that we can catch or hold or possess. It's our nature, our origin. And as such, it is the nature and origin of all things in this vast cosmos. There's an image, it's always very difficult when people come to the sits looking like this, looking for enlightenment, looking for that thing to have. And there's an old story about a father who leaves his family. I can't remember the reason, but for some reason he leaves his family, and he puts a jewel in the son's turban or headdress. And after the father leaves, the son is destitute. His father has left him, and he sells himself into slavery so that he can have food to eat, and has this terrible and difficult life, constantly searching for some way to get ahead in the world. And at the end of the story, the father finally comes back and says, well, what about the jewel in your headdress? But the son didn't know about it. He never thought to look. And this is how we go about life, not recognizing the treasure that is our inheritance, but it's just the treasure is from whence we have come itself. And it's a treasure that everybody has. It's a treasure that everything in this vast cosmos, it doesn't even have it. It is. When we realize this ubiquity, the treasure that is inexhaustible and universally shared, there is a profound ordinariness in this, and that begins to manifest through us. Joko Beck titled her first book, Nothing Special. And it's just so. If a sage should be aware of themselves as a sage, they're an ordinary person. Sometimes we have experiences. We have moments of profound clarity. And we think, oh, this is it. Oh, I alone have had this realization. And we'll go and talk to people and say, oh, you don't get it. You can't see what I can see. This is only for me. This is a kind of Zen sickness. And it usually comes with a change of direction or a decision. I'm going to go and do this. You can't understand my vast wisdom. You've never had an experience as deep as this or as powerful as this. And when we start to think like this, we just become an ordinary person. This is no different than the person who creates a hierarchy among human beings, among beings, based on their education, what degrees that they have accomplished, or their training, or their money, or their job. You just fall in with the rest of the crowd. You're doing everything just the same. Just an ordinary person. Wumen's verse says, much better than realizing the body is to realize the mind and rest. And I think what's really important to point out here is that the body isn't just the physical body, but points to the realm of form, manifestation. The plus activity, diversification. Much better than realizing the subject-object world is to realize the mind. And it's not just the intellectual mind that this is pointing to, but Dharmakaya mind, the complete mind, meaning the origin of all things. In our version of the Sila, each Sila begins with, in the Dharmakaya, there is no this and no that. This is the formless emptiness which has as its content all things in this vast cosmos before form. Much better than realizing the body is to realize the mind and rest, to dissolve into this realization, this mind. If one can realize the mind, there is no anxiety about the body. When we truly grasp shunyata, emptiness, the Dharmakaya, zero, mu, then when we see form, regardless of what the form is, regardless of what the circumstance is, we know it. We recognize its origin. We know that it is not separate. We can still have preferences about it and, opinions about it and all these kinds of things. But when we strike the root, we recognize it as not separate. So, whatever circumstance arises, we don't have anxiety about it. Oh, this is something outside. This is something different. If both body and mind are clear and distinct. So, this is talking about this harmonious, transparent, clear functioning of these activities of plus and minus, manifesting as a human being and dissolving, realizing our original home over and over again. When these functions are harmonious and clear, the person is completely fluent in this activity. Is it necessary for the wizard to be further appointed a feudal lord? This is taking us back to this first part of the koan. The Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sat in the meditation hall. So, as we sit here in the meditation hall, is there anything that needs to be added? Is this cosmos not complete? Are we not complete just as we are? The Buddha of supremely pervading, surpassing wisdom sat in the meditation hall, complete. The Buddha Dharma did not manifest in him, because there is no Buddha Dharma outside of him. There's no inside and outside to speak of. He could not attain awakening because there is no awakening outside of his manifestation of sitting in the meditation hall. What is there to add to it? What is there that's missing? So we see that this monk's statement is a statement of clearest transparency, stating things just as they are. But the monk doesn't even know it. Master Rang of Xingyang tries to help him along, and we don't really find out whether or not the monk ever grasps it. This is an easy case for us to grasp intellectually. The challenge comes when in our moment-to-moment daily lives, can we realize this same nothing to attain, nowhere to go, nothing to do, without making it into laziness, without making it into complacency? Can we grasp this experience of completion in each activity?